What's up, Canes fans? Welcome to the Canes Insight Daily Podcast, powered by Anajar and Levine Accident Attorneys. Portal keeps on moving. Every day we have some movement in or out. Going both ways potentially here as far as portal movement. Thomas Gore, defensive tackle, enters the portal. Could that be a sign with respect to Simeon Barrow, the defensive tackle for Michigan State? We'll talk about that. Also, we've been saying Miami's in the market for a corner, a nickel corner especially. D'Angelo Pons, Shamanan Madonna, went on to James Madison, became a freshman All-America, has now entered the portal. Could Miami be interested in that? We'll be talking about that and more. First, I want to tell you real quick about my friends at Anajar and Levine Accident Attorneys. They're not going anywhere. They are there. They're not portaling out. If you or someone you care about has been injured in an accident, call 1-800-747-FREE, 1-800-747-3733, and take back control of your life with the absolute best in the field of accident litigation. So, like we said last show, portal gives, the portal takes. Some of Miami's defensive tackle depth went out the door with Thomas Gore, the Georgia State transfer from a year ago who played last year, 6', 280. 8 tackles, 2 sacks, 4 tackles for loss. Played last year. He is now out the door. Could Miami bring in someone to replace him? We'll see. We talked about Simeon Barrow last show, but this is a loss. And I'll bring in Peter Ariz here to talk about, we had this conversation off air, Pete. I want you to make some of these points because, you had some concerns about losing a player like Thomas Gore.
Well, look, we understand this isn't your 300-plus pound space-eating defensive tackle, right, D? But the way I personally look at it, I understand it's the nature of what happens now. There's going to be guys coming in and guys coming out. That's just what it is in terms of numbers. Gore's an interesting one for me because you look at last season, D, he comes in, in that Texas A&M game, makes some solid contributions at the end of that game. Had a couple sacks against Temple. Obviously, that Temple offensive line wasn't very good. But doesn't end up playing that many snaps later in the season. Understandably, Coach Guidry had kind of changed the scheme up a bit where there was only 3 down linemen for, a bunch of the games at the end of the season there. But I just look at it like valuable depth on the defensive line goes a long way. I remember talking to some people before he transferred to Miami from Georgia State, some NFL people saying, look, this guy may not be a high round draft pick, but he's got some intriguing twitch at that position, right? So to me, again, understanding that's the nature of the game these days in college football, right? It's a numbers game. But I also don't want to just bash every guy who goes out the door, right? Because I look at it saying, look, this is a guy who could potentially have been a nice depth piece for this defense. Even Coach Guidry was saying last year in press conferences that he was, giving them big helpful contributions there with some injuries. Said he came in a little overweight as spring first, but then seemed to show some of that explosiveness at times last year. So again, can he be replaced? Yes, and we expect another body to come in here for sure. But he was no scrub. I'll put it to you that way, D.
Yeah, and look, most of these guys aren't, right? Most of these guys can't play, and there's a trade-off. Like we mentioned with Pulliam entering the portal or Savion Riley. These are not guys that just could not play at all at Miami. Obviously with Gore, you mentioned the size. You want to get bigger there. You brought in a Marley Cook, who's not that much bigger than Gore. Probably a little bit more productive, powerful player. At least that's your projection with a Marley Cook versus Gore. So maybe, you don't necessarily want 2 of those guys, but you got to replace him. Simeon Barrow to me becomes a must when you lose a Jared Harrison Hunt and a Thomas Gore. You have to close the deal on Simeon Barrow. I continue to feel good with that recruitment, but you never know with the portal. It is hard when you don't have those long-standing relationships, but they got to close that deal. And I think this is a sign of Justin Scott, Armando Blunt, Artavius Jones. Those guys are going to have to play. Josh Horton. You need those guys to do something and to show that they merit being on the field and developing on the field in a rotational role. Also interesting to see what happens with Anthony Campbell, who is the other guy in a similar spot to Thomas Gore, transferred from Louisiana Monroe, played less than Gore last year, had a nice spring, and brings a little more size, 6'7", 280, 285 to the table than Gore. So do you keep the more physically talented player as opposed to the more developed, productive player? Do you lose both of them? The portal's still working out here over the next couple of days, but I think you're going to have a much clearer picture of Miami's defensive tackle rotation by the end of the week. But, that's it. Like I said, it's a loss, and wish him well. And you really hope that Miami, through recruiting, is able to stop having to take 6-foot defensive tackles in the portal like Gore and Cook long term. Now, those guys can play football. They can help your team. But I think long term, what you want is your Justin Scotts, your Armando Blunts, your Artavius Jones every year. Your Josh Horton's developing those body types, that level of athleticism through recruiting, and then a constant flow, because Pete, you've seen it, and you know this from recruiting for the draft. Defensive tackles are a rare commodity. It's hard to get those guys in the portal. You got to get them in recruiting, and you got to pay top dollar.
Speaking of that, D, we have a tweet here that was pretty interesting that popped up from our friends in the Florida State space. We'll pull up the post here. This is in respect to Simeon Barrow. Miami made a very aggressive approach with NIL, I'm told, would be the highest bidder by far. Hurricanes trending to have the highest paid roster in college football, or right up there.
Well, listen, if you're a family of a recruit or a potential portal entry and you hear that, what does that tell you? If you want to get paid, go to Miami. If you want to be arguing with the coaches about NIL, like Patrick Payton and all those guys that either left in the portal or flirted with the portal and fought with the coaches publicly on Twitter, you can go to the other place. I know they brag about having the best NIL program in the country, but then when they finish second on recruits and portal kids, you hear about how they had no money. I think that's probably closer to the truth. They're just being outspent here, and money talks, and we'll see where this thing goes. Obviously, Florida State, look, after 2 embarrassing seasons, they've had 2 very good seasons. Let's see what happens this year with Miami's roster bolstered by this very, very successful NIL program. And look, if you're watching this podcast and you don't want to be making whiny, defeatist tweets like this or posts like this, you probably want to contribute to Canes Connection and ensure that we continue to have this NIL program that has our rivals crying. So please, CanesConnection.com. Use promo code CIS, 20% off the first month, access to a private Zoom chat. Be part of the solution. Be part of the reason why FSU writers and FSU fans are crying about the money that Miami is spending. Be part of the change you want to see in the world when it comes to FSU going down, Miami going up. That's how this is going to be done, through contributing and supporting CanesConnection.com.
D, we were told Miami was broke last year.
Yeah, it's funny how that worked. The whole Ruiz thing, they thought that was going to be the downfall of the program, and now we're spending more than we were spending before. It's very interesting how that works. But again, that's thanks to people like you who have contributed to the Canes Connection, and those of you who will be contributing to Canes Connection, promo code CIS. Be part of the reason why FSU remains as the intercontinental champions of the state, perennial second place to Miami. Right now, there's distant second or third in terms of spending. And this season and the foreseeable future, as long as we're doing that, they will be second or third on the field, as it should be and as it historically has been. So anyways, enough of that. Let's talk about where some of that Canes Connection resources, where that may find itself. And that's D'Angelo Pons, a corner out of Chaminade-Madonna High School, went to James Madison, played nickel there, did a really nice job. 52 tackles, 2 interceptions, 12 pass deflections, 2 fumble recoveries, 2 tackles for loss. His true freshman year. He is a smaller corner, 5'9", 165, but blazing speed. 10.47 in the 100 meters, 21.54 in the 200 meters, state champion in both events at the 1A level. Again, he was a first-team freshman All-America, multiple locations. Did not have a lot of interest out of high school because of that size. He's only 5'9", 165. I made a post on CanesInsight.com on the forums, which, by the way, check those out if you want to get into these really detailed discussions of high school recruits, because always when someone jumps in the portal, you go back and look at the posts that were made about them when they were recruits, and there's almost always somebody posting about these guys, even the deepest sleepers who end up being first-round picks. In this case, I made a post about D'Angelo Pons. The size is the obvious question there, but the guy knew what he was doing. Very smart, very instinctive, very fast, a fluid cover guy. And you saw that in his freshman year, again, with the 52 tackles, 2 picks. You watching the cut up, I mean, he is a guy, he's a real corner. He's not just a track guy that runs straight lines. He can change directions. He has instincts. He can play the ball. Again, 12 pass deflections. I think that speaks to the ability to play the ball. And James Madison, former FCS, new FBS, but this was a very, very strong, small program. And they have good players there that have gone pro. So don't sleep on James Madison, Pete. I know you're very in tune with that world, that level of football and some of the players that come out of there.
Yeah, I was actually going to say it's been a program that has done well NFL-wise. You always hear of 2 or 3 kids a year on the radar out of JMU. And I believe they had the receiver a couple years ago who transferred out of there as well that Miami was interested in. I the name is escaping me right now. But yeah, definitely a team at the FCS level there that does a really good job of recognizing and diagnosing some of this talent early.
And look, the puppies bark early, right? You don't want to wait too long on kids. And this guy right away, he didn't even need to gain weight, right? He just, based on his instincts and speed, and he did gain some weight from high school, he put up these numbers. So you wonder if he continues to get in that strength and conditioning program, he's not going to get taller. 5'9" on the border, what you want at nickel corner. But if you're giving up size, you want a superpower elsewhere, right? You don't want guys that are small and slow, but they're good football players. You want guys that have at least some sort of difference-making physical ability on top of being good football players. And what Pons lacks in size, he makes up for in speed. Again, state champ in Florida, the 100-200. So this is like 4.3 type speed we're talking about here in the slot. And you've seen so many downfield routes coming from the slot, attacking the seams. Philip Dorsett made a living on it, using his track speed to get down the seam, catching bombs from Stephen Morris, and we've seen it in the years since then quite a bit. Pons gives you the ability to run with those guys anywhere they go. He can run with anyone in the country. Maybe a bigger slot or can give him some problems because of his size, but he has a lot of tools, and Miami does have interest. Kind of bury the lead there. Miami's been looking for a nickel corner. D'Angelo Ponce is someone that Miami does have interest in and is exploring and evaluating because he could be a fit with this defense, given the need at nickel corner. You could move Mish Powell from nickel to safety and do a lot of things with someone like D'Angelo Ponce. That's one name to watch that has entered the portal that I think Miami is going to be interested in. I know On3 reported that Miami was sending an analyst out to meet with him. We'll see where that relationship goes because there is a major need for Miami. I'll say a major need, but certainly a major want at the nickel position.
And D, we keep talking about Mish Powell moving back to safety, but a guy that I've been big on is Jadis Richard at corner. I think he has all the tools there. We saw against Florida State last year when his number was called upon, had a really good showing there after not having many reps throughout the season, right? But is he a guy too who could maybe play some safety with his physical profile? And you have Deani Hill coming in now as well from Marshall. So I wonder if that's an option as well.
He certainly could. That's what he played in high school. People talked about him as a nickel too. He's very versatile. You want to find a spot that he fits in and keep him there instead of moving around and not being good at anything. But it's an option. You want your best defensive backs on the field. He has the size to play safety, no question about it. So when you have different guys that can cover, you have different options. I think the key for Miami is they want guys that can cover entering the building. They got Deani Hill. Pond's another guy that he's a man cover guy all the way with his speed. Obviously, the size gives him some challenges, but in terms of turning and running with anybody in the country, he can do that better than anybody. And if you're talking about a guy like, Florida has a very dynamic receiver that they'll line up in the slot, Wilson, number 3. There's other teams on the schedule that are going to be playing guys like that, and he will be able to run with those guys if Miami goes in this direction and is able to land D'Angelo Ponce. Shaman Amadana, again, a high school teammate of Jeremiah Smith, high school teammate of Cedric Bailey, high school teammate of JoJo Trader, high school teammate of Zaquan Patterson, the latter two being Miami Hurricanes. So there's a lot of ties there.
Definitely. And look, these were impressive clips here in this cut up as we've been watching a guy who made a lot of plays last year for JMU. And I mean, again, I mentioned FCS, obviously they're FBS now, but I mean, he was doing it against solid competition here in the Sun Belt. Yeah,
listen, players, we watched the draft, Pete, and you see there's players everywhere. I saw some schools I'd never heard of being attached to cornerbacks. The one thing that translates, obviously size is important, and that's one thing you're missing with Pons, but the speed. When you're a 4.3 guy, it doesn't matter if you're in James Madison or Austin P or wherever you're at. If you could run 4.3, you're going to get eyebrows raised. And that's what this guy can do. And he can play on top of that. He's productive. He has ball production. And he's tough too. I mean, he's not big, but the guy's a football player. We've seen him tackle, seen him dive in on screens and really be quick to diagnose and click and close and react. He's an aggressive player. So I think the question is, how big can he get? We'll see. Miami's going to get eyes on him, so they'll be able to see the body type a little more now that he's been out of college a year or in college a year. So it'll be very interesting to see where this one goes. But when Miami had their portal shopping list after this great flood of commits, defensive tackle, corner, potentially a nickel corner, and possibly another defensive end. You got Barrow, you have Tyler Barron, D'Angelo Pons. How many of those guys enter the fold? There's another name that enter the fold. We'll be keeping track of it on CanesInsight.com and on the Canes Insight Daily podcast. So stay tuned. A new name every day, man.
And D, one last thing to add here is these Pons highlights keep playing. You mentioned a few days ago that one of the things lacking, at least recruiting wise, that needs to continue to get up to par is speed at the cornerback position. You mentioned it here. He has the speed. And then you watch these clips, you see him up against 6'2", 6'3" wide receivers. Not that it's ideal, but we saw last year Guidry really trusting Jaden Davis and Darryl Porter, two smaller corners really. On the outside, you see Jaden Davis gets drafted last week, but again, he's another guy that you automatically say nickel corner, but a lot of clips here. He's playing on the boundary there.
Yeah, great point. By the way, notice the shirt, the Canes wear, caneswear.com, Canes wearing Davey, #1 stop. Miami Heat off season, but we're going to make a big trade. Get the Miami Heat gear there, Dolphins, you name it. But yeah, on Pons and the speed. Porter, Damari Brown, Jadis Richard, good players that I would not say are speedsters by cornerback standards. Deani Hill, similar, same deal. Robert Stafford is fast, but really, and then Ryan Mack and Frederic, I wouldn't say either is a true speedster. Maybe Mack a little bit, but not to the level of what Pons is bringing with that 4.3 speed. So I think that would be a different dynamic in the room that we really need.
All right, D. Well, wrapping it up here. Great information as always. Anything else you want to say here?
Nope. We're in the midst of it, man. The portal is cooking, and we're just going to keep it rolling every single day. And like you saw the weekend, we had 4 commits. We had 4 videos out right about, I think we were about 1 minute after the commits.
Yeah.
So hopefully we're recording some more instant reactions, right? Stay tuned for those and stay locked on to CanesInsight.com and to Canes Insight Daily. And by the way, shout out to the 3 Live Canes podcast, who they just came back to the CanesInsight.com YouTube channel, and they did an awesome job. Great live show yesterday. They're every Wednesday at 9. So check those boys out. They do an awesome job. You probably already know about them and how great their show is, but if not, definitely tune in next Wednesday or watch the replay, which is on YouTube.
Go Canes.
Go Canes.